My son's wedding should have been the proudest day of my life. Instead, his wife pointed at me and said I didn't belong, and he stayed silent. I had paid for his college, his car, and even part of this wedding. Still, they thought they could humiliate me and take control of my $600,000 home. They didn't know I had one last move. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat in my living room long after the guests had gone home, long after the music and the clinking glasses and the polite laughter had turned back into ordinary Portland night. The house held still like a held breath. The furnace clicked once, then went quiet. Streetlights threw a faint amber line across the hardwood. I laid myself plank by stubborn plank. During the summer, Margaret and I decided we weren't going to spend a dime we didn't have to. Her photo rested on the mantel, the one from our 25th anniversary, her cheeks still apple bright, my hand at her waist. I could hear the Benson Hotel in my head, could see the crystal and the roses and the stiff backs of people pretending not to hear my daughter-in-law's words. I told myself to breathe. In, out. Let the room come back into focus. Let the shape of the sofa, the oak coffee table I refinished with 3 coats of varnish, the smell of old pine and books steady me. I told myself to sit, so I did, and when I did, the truth came and sat right beside me. The ledger of a life is not written in numbers first. Still, the numbers arrived, because numbers have a way of lining up when your heart is sore. $60,000 for Ethan's college tuition, paid in semesters and summers, paid with the remains of a teacher's pension and evening shifts in the school library 2 nights a week. $25,000 for the Camry with the sensible mileage, the one I told him would carry him anywhere as long as he carried himself with it. Another $8,000 over the years for deposits, for dental work, for a laptop when he quit at midterms. And then the wedding. I swore I would not go into debt for it. I swore. Yet when the florist swayed him with peonies and the planner said, "Once in a lifetime," I opened a line of credit for $40,000, because once in a lifetime is a mean phrase when you are a father and a widower and the world measures your love in receipts. I kept the invoices in a manila folder labeled Ethan Wedding, all caps, neat as a chalkboard. It felt strange, remembering while I sat under the soft lamplight that so many dollars could evaporate so quietly into a single evening, that so many years of care could get drowned out by the ring of a crystal flute. But it was not the expense that clawed at me. It was the moment she pointed. "Don't sit here. You're embarrassing us." Her voice was sharp as a snapped violin string. I can still see the way her chin lifted, the easy cruelty, and I can still see the way my son's eyes dropped to the glossy floor as if the grain in the wood had more right to his attention than I did. I walked out, measured and slow, the way I taught 9th graders to line up for fire drills. I walked out, and the double doors sighed behind me. And I was a man again, not a prop. The night air had a clean bite to it. I stood there until my hands stopped shaking. I told myself, dignity first. Then I came home to the quiet that knows my name. My home is a modest Cape Cod, painted the same buttercream for 20 years because Margaret loved the way the morning sun warmed it. An appraiser says it is worth $600,000 now. I say it is worth the nights we slept with the window cracked to hear the rain, the evenings we ate chili at the oak table while Ethan finished algebra, and I pretended not to feed him extra cornbread. I sanded these floors until my shoulders ached, and when I stand barefoot in the hallway, I can tell you where the boards creak by heart. On the mantel, there is a jar of smooth stones we picked up from the Oregon coast, each one the size of a wish. Next to that, the little clay dinosaur Ethan made in 2nd grade, lopsided and still brave. The house has always been a body we lived inside together. It has always been a shelter and record book and a church. That is the problem, of course. Houses are not just property. They are stories people think they can rewrite if they get their hands on the deed. I ran my palm along the back of the sofa and felt the linen give a little. I tried on the thought the way you try on a coat in a store and hope it does not fit. If they could have made me small enough to tuck into a corner, they would have. And if they could have folded this home into an argument on paper, they would have done that too. On the mantel, Margaret smiled at me the way she always did when I got stubborn. Outside, a car rolled by, and the cat glanced up from the rug as if to ask whether this was a storm or only wind. Earlier in the day, the world had felt like warm bread. The Benson gleamed. Everyone had something to say about the chandeliers. Vanessa's dress threw off light. The quartet tuned and then pulled us into their small tide of melody. I tried to carry myself the way I had every day since Margaret passed, shoulders back, shirt pressed, steady. When Vanessa's finger sliced the air and found me, when the room made that collective little inhalation people make in the presence of rudeness, I expected Ethan's voice to arrive. I waited. He did not speak. That silence is the one I am writing on my bones now. It was not the silence of confusion or a man caught between two loves. It was practiced. It was the kind of silence men use when they want someone else to spill, someone else to pay the bill, someone else to hold the door so they do not have to say they wanted it opened all along. I am not cruel. I am not. I have been a teacher long enough to know that fear can knock the words out of a throat. But I have also been a father long enough to know when quiet has become a habit. I caught my reflection in the dark TV screen. 65 years old. Crow's feet, where the sun put them. A jaw that clenched when I did the math of the last decade. The human face is a ledger, too. And then my gaze fell from the glass to the mantel again, to the frame that holds us on our wedding day. I stood and took the photo in my hands. Mags, I whispered, letting my thumb circle the curve of her cheek. We built this, you and me. We built a life no one thought 2 kids with a cheap couch and a second-hand coffee maker could manage. I promised I'd protect it. I will. I promise again. The room did that thing where it answers in its own language. The furnace clicked alive, and warm air poured into the vents. The house seemed to nod. I set the photo back and crossed to the little secretary desk in the corner. The drop front still sticks unless you lift it just so. Inside, the folders lined up like soldiers. House, insurance, pension, taxes, Ethan wedding. I pulled them out one by one, laid them on the table, and let the paper smell rise. There is something honest about paper. It remembers what you signed when your heart was tender and makes you read it again when your heart is tough. The mortgage is paid. The deed is clean, recorded in 1995, transferred from the builder who liked to talk too much about his boats. There is no second mortgage. There is a home equity line I used for the roof in 2013, cleared the next summer by working weekends. The life insurance is $300,000, term converted to whole life after Margaret died, because I could not stomach the idea that everything would vanish on a date a stranger calculated. The beneficiary is Ethan, with a contingent to a small scholarship fund I set up in Margaret's name if I outlive him. I read my own handwriting on a sticky note I left in the folder years ago. When you feel rushed, slow down. I sat again and pressed my hands to my knees. Numbers and documents are solid ground, but tonight they rolled underfoot like a deck in high surf. The problem was not that Ethan knew about these things. He should know. The problem was how quickly knowledge becomes leverage when respect goes missing. Respect? I said the word out loud, and it sounded like a plank sliding into place. Respect is the thing you cannot buy back once you give it away. Respect is what you live inside when your body gets old. If they took that first, the money would follow. My throat went tight. I thought of how many times I had sent an extra 100 when he called and said he was short. How many times have I told myself it's only money, the way generous people do when we are afraid that saying no will make us small in our child's eyes. I thought of the Camry, the community college summer classes, the time I drove across town at 10 at night because his sink was overflowing and the landlord wouldn't answer. I did not do those things to buy loyalty. I did them because I am his father. The house glowed the way houses do when the lamplight warms the corners and the rest of the world goes slate gray. I let my gaze travel. The maple bookcase Margaret bought at a church rummage sale, still smelling faintly of lemon oil. The clock over the fireplace that ticks too loudly when the room is quiet, a heartbeat for a home. The photograph of Ethan in a blue cap and gown, me beside him holding a rolled program, and a grin so wide it nearly split my face. This is the part no one tells you about. It is possible to love a person and not love what they do. Possible to miss the boy while you hold the man accountable. My chest hurt as if I had climbed stairs. It isn't about punishing him, I said into the room. It's about stopping the train before it takes the last bridge. I made coffee because my mother always said a cup of something hot could persuade a man to stay on his feet. While it dripped, I took the house file and the insurance file and the thin folder where I kept bank statements and spread them in rows. Savings at the credit union, $280,000, checking with enough to cover the month. The new line of credit for the wedding at $40,000, used nearly to the edge because the hotel required a guarantee and the florist wanted half down, and the band's manager had a voice like a used car and a contract to match. I traced the numbers with the side of my thumb. I thought about what I had heard in fragments over the last months, things that felt like pebbles at the time and felt like warning stones now. Vanessa says, too casually, that old houses are too much work. Ethan mentions a simpler arrangement for me down the line, as if a man's life could be tidied like a pantry in the afternoon. He brought up assisted living and called it secure, like security is something that happens to you instead of something you build with courage and community. Coffee in hand, I carried my mug back to the mantel and stood with Margaret again. The scent rose like a small good thing. "You hear me, Mags?" I whispered. "I will not be shoved to the corner of my own life. I will not be a line item on their plan. We worked too hard for this. I am not only angry, I am awake." The word felt right. Awake. Awake to how a small cruelty in a ballroom opens into a larger theft if you let it. Awakened to how love without respect is just appetite dressed up for company. Awakened to how elder folks like me get written out of our own stories if we agree to be quiet long enough. A teacher learns to inventory tools. I counted mine. A clean deed, a life insurance policy written on my terms, a savings account that neither of them could touch without my consent. A good lawyer, Margaret Chen, who had looked me in the eye last year and said, "Robert, you are not a doormat client. Call me if anyone makes you feel like one." I had smiled, told her she had a way with metaphors, and we had both laughed. Tonight, the laugh caught in my throat, but the memory steadied my step. I took out a notepad and wrote in block letters. Call Margaret. Freeze wedding payments. Review beneficiaries. Secure deed and titles. Change account alerts to text and email. Passwords. Power of attorney. I underlined each item once. I am not a man who underlines twice. One stroke is enough when your hand is sure. The cat leapt onto the sofa and arranged himself like a small loaf. He doesn't know anything about deeds, but he knows about calm, and he lent me some. I turned to the secretary again and slid open the narrow drawer that sticks. At the back lay keys and a roll of quarters and the faded business card of the notary who came to our kitchen the day Margaret and I updated our wills. I found the original of the life insurance policy, the clean white of the house deed, and the letter from the credit union approving the line for the wedding. I slipped each into a fresh folder and labeled it Today. It felt like a small prayer to name a thing and put it in order. In my chest, the old pain of the reception ebbed. In its place grew a steadiness I had been missing since I put on the navy suit and tied my tie just right. The night had length to it still, so I let the memory of Ethan as a boy visit me. Barefoot, grass-stained, hollering that he'd nearly caught a frog. Sunblock in his eyebrows. A kid who cried when his wooden plane snapped and quieted, only when I gave him my good glue and said, "Hand steady, son. Fixing things takes time." We fixed it, and for a week he showed that plane to everyone who came through our door like we had invented aviation. The ache that arrived with the memory was not bitterness. It was grief for the simple arithmetic of then, when love was food and bedtime and a folded note in a lunch bag, and respect was so normal it did not need a name. I let myself feel it. I let it pass. I looked at the man he is now, or tried to, and told the truth inside my own skull. He needs a boundary so he can find his spine. I need a boundary so I can keep mine. Outside, the wind pushed a few leaves down the street. The neighbor's porch light blinked off. I feel foolish sometimes for narrating to an empty room, but tonight the room was doing fine company, and my words did not go to waste. They think I will fold because fathers do, I said softly. They think kindness is the same as consent. The words sounded like a lesson plan. Maybe that's fitting. We teach the next lesson when the last one is ignored. I turned off the lamp in the corner and let the room lean on the glow from the fireplace bulbs I leave, strung along the mantel each winter. The house shrugged into its night shape. In that dim light, the frames on the mantel made a small gallery. Margaret, Ethan's kindergarten grin with the missing teeth. The three of us were under the Douglas fir outside the community center. You're still my family, I told the pictures, even if the story has a rough chapter right now. At some point, I realized I was not waiting for sleep. I was waiting for the morning. Morning contains action in a way that night does not. I stacked the folders into a tidy pile, squared the corners, and slid a pen underneath the clip so I would not wander the kitchen in my robe hunting for one. I set my phone on the table and opened the settings to double-check account alerts. I changed 2 passwords. I wrote down Margaret Chen's number, even though it is already in my favorites. This is how resolve looks when you are 65. It is not a slammed fist. It is a well-made list and coffee measured before bed, so the machine will greet you like a colleague. I let myself picture the credit union, the smell of paper and toner, the way the teller says my name and asks after my garden in spring. I let myself picture Margaret's office, the tidy fern, the framed print of Mount Hood, the bowl of mints she never eats. I saw my hand laying the deed on her desk, the insurance policy, the line of credit agreement. I heard my voice, even and non-theatrical, saying, I am ready to protect what remains. I imagined Margaret looking at me the way a good lawyer looks at a man who has decided to stop apologizing for his backbone. And then, because I cannot help it, I pictured Vanessa's face when the music stops, not because I want to humiliate her, but because sometimes a woman like that only learns what a line is when she steps over it and finds out there is no floor on the other side. I do not want vengeance. I said it out loud, and I said it in my head, and I said it to Margaret's photo in case the world needs witnesses. I want boundaries. I want my son to own his silence and try again with speech. I want my home to remain a home. I want to live the rest of my years with my dignity intact, to wake and make oatmeal and watch the rain on the maple and know that no one has shoved me into a corner I did not choose. I rinsed my mug, set it in the rack, and wiped the counter with the cloth that had a faded blue stripe. The smallest tasks comfort you when the larger ones loom. It is not avoidance. It is a way of reminding your hands that they are good at making order. When I turned back to the table, the folders gleamed softly. On top of the stack, I placed a single sheet of paper and wrote a sentence. I wanted to be the hinge between this night and what comes next. I am the owner of this house and the steward of this life, and I will act accordingly. It looked almost formal. It looked like something a younger man might scoff at. It looked right to me. I folded the page and slipped it into the pocket of my jacket for the morning, not because I needed a script, but because I wanted to carry a sentence that tells the truth. The clock said a little past midnight. The street had gone quiet as a chapel. I stood again at the mantel. We made promises, I told Margaret, to stand with each other, to build and to keep. I cannot stand with you in person now, but I can keep. I can keep what we built. I can keep my word. The words did not echo. They settled into the fabric of the room the way good vows do. I think if you cut open the wall, you would find them tucked between studs like luck. Before I turned in, I walked through the house the way I always do. Down the hall, where the boards lift a little, in August. Into the small bedroom where Ethan's childhood posters still curl at the corners, now a guest room that smells faintly of dust and laundry soap. Into the kitchen, where the light over the sink makes the stainless steel look like the inside of a seashell. Up the 2 steps to the back door to check the bolt. Every house asks for a ritual at night. Mine asked me to say goodnight to the rooms it gave me when I was young and thought I could hold everything in my hands forever. Tomorrow, I said to each space. Tomorrow, we act. Eat. In bed, the ceiling looked close until I blinked 3 times and let it pull back into the distance it belongs in. Breath followed breath. The brain is a restless neighbor. It reminded me of the phrase I overheard once, the one Vanessa let slip with a laugh. Once we're married, his house is ours. There are sentences a person cannot unhear. There are also answers you can live into. Let them think a deed is a ribbon you can cut at a party. Let them think a man is a suitcase you can roll into a facility so you can measure out his days in visiting hours and statements. I measure days in morning light on buttercream paint and in the sound of my own shoes on floors I made smooth. I measure days in the taste of coffee and the weight of keys in my pocket and the steady knock of a heart that knows where it lives. I set my alarm for early because banks and lawyers keep decent hours, and I wanted to be waiting when their doors opened. Before I turned the phone face down, I scrolled through photos for no reason, except that people my age do that at midnight when sleep waits just out of reach. There we were, at Cannon Beach. Stones in our pockets and the wind making us look younger than we were. There we were in the backyard with a cheap grill and a hamburger so fat it needed 2 hands to hold. There we were the day Ethan took the Camry for the first time, Margaret's hand on my elbow because a mother can feel the world tilt when a boy gets keys. Love is not a ledger, I reminded myself, but sometimes you do have to balance it. I slept for a while. When I woke, it was still night, but it felt like the very edge of morning, the place where you can pretend that the world is building itself back up in silence. I sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed my calves the way old men do. I said the sentence again under my breath. Owner and steward, act accordingly. It calmed me the way good weather calms a farmer. I pulled on the jacket I had hung on the chair, felt the folded paper in the pocket, and smiled without showing teeth. Back in the kitchen, I set out the mug and filled the machine and placed the neat stack of folders in the canvas bag we use for library books. I checked the front door and found the porch light had timed itself off, which felt like a kind of blessing, the house telling me it knew the plan. Then I turned off the lamp in the living room, but not before I touched the frame on the mantel with my fingertips. I had done enough touching of paper and wood for one night. The next touching would be of a phone, dialing a number, and then of a pen, signing my name where it counts. The next words would not be apologies. They would be instructions. And if there is sorrow in that, so be it. Sorrow is not a crime. Surrender is. When I finally lay down again, I did not rehearse arguments or compose sharp phrases for the people who had treated me like a guest in my own life. I counted the real things I could hold. Keys, deed, policy, phone, coffee, a name on a door I can walk through. And I counted the other real things I cannot hold, but I can stand on. Promise, dignity, the long practice of a steady voice. In that counting, I found sleep. Before it took me, I said a simple good night and a simpler promise. Tomorrow, we begin to set this right. Tomorrow, we move from hurt to action. Tomorrow, I make the call that ties this quiet night to a louder day. Morning came quietly and clear, and I met it with coffee, a straight back, and a stack of folders spread across the maple table like tools. The house felt steady in daylight. Sun warmed the buttercream walls. The hardwood I laid with my own hands held a soft shine. Margaret's photo on the mantel caught a slant of light, her smile as sure as ever. I told the room and I told her that today would be about steps, not sorrow. The deed went on top, the the savings statements under it, the life insurance folder beside them. I slid my phone next to the pen that fits my hand and took a breath that felt like the first clean one in days. I dialed Margaret Chen at 8 sharp. She answered on the second ring, voice steady, no small talk. I told her I wanted every pending wedding payment frozen. The line of credit was $40,000, $35,000 authorized, but not yet settled. Revoke authorization on anything not posted. Notify the hotel, the florist, the band, and the planner. Route all calls to you. She was quiet for a beat, then asked if I was certain. If they want my money, I said, they need to remember my money comes with respect. She exhaled and said she would prepare letters, but warned this would be very public. They made it public, I told her. I am only making my boundary visible. The credit union opens at 8:30. I drove the pickup because the bench seat steadies a man who needs to feel like he can carry his own weight. Inside, the lobby smelled like toner and old carpet. A manager with a blue badge led me to a glass room with a fake fern and a phone that could probably land a plane. I asked for a hold on a draft from my line of credit, $35,000 tied to a Portland hotel. I asked for text alerts on any transaction over $100 and in-person verification for any beneficiary change. The manager typed, nodded, and printed a confirmation with a stamp that sounded like a small gavel on the desk. Outside in the lot, the air carried that clean metal smell right before a rain. I called Margaret and told her the hold was live. She said she had already called the hotel accounting office and the planner with my authorization. They will call you soon, she said. Let it go to voicemail. I will answer. She added that she would send letters to each vendor and the bank summarizing my instructions. Embarrassment changes behavior, she cautioned. It can also make people dangerous, I told her. I was not looking for danger, only daylight. She made a small sound I have learned means approval. Her office is a low brick building with a flag and azaleas out front. Inside, the receptionist offered water and called me Mr. Miller. Margaret met me with a firm handshake and sat me at a round table. She clipped the deed, flagged the hotel contract, and started calling. With my permission, she told the hotel accountant the payor had revoked authorization for unsettled charges, effective immediately. We made the same notice to the band, the florist, and the planner. Each call placed a brick back under my feet. When the calls were done, she slid a single sheet toward me, a limited power of attorney. It authorized her to gather records, instruct the bank, and speak for me with vendors about payments tied to the event. Sign this, and I can pull emails, invoices, internal notes, she said, tapping the corner. I signed. The pen felt heavy in my hand, not with anger, but with purpose. She reached for the life insurance folder and raised an eyebrow. Ethan is still listed as a beneficiary? I nodded. Add a contingent to a scholarship fund in Margaret's name, she suggested, and place language that any beneficiary must be in good standing with you at the time of your passing. It sounded formal and a little strange, but it sounded right. I told her to draft it. Action warmed me in a way grief never could. I left her office and stopped at a diner for eggs and toast. The waitress topped off my coffee and called me Han. I opened my phone. A neighbor's daughter had sent a screenshot. Someone posted a photo from the ballroom at the exact second Vanessa pointed and told me to leave. My napkin hung from my hand like a white flag I did not wave. The caption chased a cheap laugh. I set the phone face down and let the first rush pass. It was not just humiliation, it was the theft of my story, cut to a frame and handed to strangers. When I looked again, the post had hundreds of reactions. Some were mean, some were kind. One detail swallowed the rest. Ethan had tapped the tiny heart. A son likes a photograph of his father's humiliation. That little icon weighed more than every cruel word. I did not call him. I finished my eggs, paid the bill, left a tip that said, "Thank you for patience," and walked outside into rain that still would not fall. In the cab of the truck, I called the credit union again. I asked them to add a verbal password to every account and to require a second verification call for any wire or cashier's check over $1,000. The woman on the line asked me to choose a word. I chose the street where Margaret and I rented our first apartment, the one with rattling windows and a landlord who fixed things with tape. Saying that word to a stranger made me feel like I had just locked a door and checked it twice. At home, I spread the folders on the table again. I lifted the deed and felt its reassuring weight. Last year's tax bill lists under $600,000. The savings statement reads $280,000. These are not trophies. They are the roof that keeps a man dry, the furnace he can repair, the dental crown he can afford in February. I wrote the numbers on a yellow pad and drew a box around them, a line I could see. This house is a shelter. This money is work made visible. Margaret called with updates. The hotel tried to push the remaining charge and failed. The planner was extremely disappointed. The florist was polite, then quiet. The band manager swore and hung up. "Expect more messages," she said. "Route them to me. Say nothing." I told her about the post and Ethan's tiny heart. She was silent for 6 seconds, then said, "I am sorry, we cannot take that back, but we can file notices. Paper does not lie." I moved through the house with purpose. I checked the firebox where the originals live. I changed 2 passwords and wrote the new ones carefully on a card I keep in the safe. I printed the alert confirmations and slid them into plastic sleeves, because plastic sleeves make a wary man feel armed. The cat watched me from the back of the sofa as if he had assigned himself to keep me in his sight. "We are all right," I told him. He blinked slowly. Approval granted. In the afternoon, I drove back to Margaret's office with a fresh stack. She took me into the conference room, a long table, warmer lights, the kind of room where people agree to things. She handed me another document authorizing her to request digital records from the hotel and vendors, including internal notes that mention my name. I signed. She asked me to write a short account of the moment I was told to leave. I kept it simple. I wrote what happened and what I did. No adjectives, no heat. The paper is clearest when it is not trying to persuade. We discussed beneficiaries. She drafted the contingent scholarship clause with care and read it back to me. Hearing Margaret's name in a sentence of law steadied me. She talked about the house as a legacy, not leverage. She said love and law can sit at the same table if respect sets the places. I felt something settle in me. I was not just stopping a wedding bill. I was framing my life in language that could stand up. On the way home, the sky finally opened. Rain tapped the windshield with that old, comforting beat. I stopped for onions and a small roast, because a man should cook when he can. Back in the kitchen, I browned the meat, added the onions, set the oven, and let the smell of patience fill the rooms. While it cooked, I typed a 1-page account of the day. Calls made, holds placed, documents signed. It was not for the court. It was for me. Proof on paper that I had moved from hurt to plan. Evening pulled the house into its warm gold. I sat in the armchair by the window and spoke one line out loud, the line that would carry me forward. "They think I lost. The game has just begun." It did not sound like boasting. It sounded like a man picking up his tools. The phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. The hotel left a message about interruptions to contracted services and mutual expectations. I forwarded it to Margaret and did not listen. I called the credit union again and asked for one more guardrail. Any request for a new card would require in-person verification and a second password. The woman said most people do not ask for that. I said most people do not get turned into a joke on a screen. She apologized for the world. I thanked her for her help. Then I walked through the house in the quiet way I learned as a young husband. Back door checked, windows latched, mail sorted, mantel touched. The clay dinosaur stared into the dim like a brave little sentry. I sat again and reviewed the stack. Limited power of attorney signed, alerts confirmed, hold placed, letters drafted. I added a fresh page to the top and wrote a sentence in block letters. I will not fund my own erasure. I followed it with another. Respect first, then everything else. Simple lines, but they steadied me more than any speech could. I slid the page under the stamped copies like a promise between friends and closed the folder with a clean thud. Before bed, I looked at the screenshot one last time. The man in the photo looked older than I feel, but he looked steady too. The napkin in his hand read like a flag of truce he chose not to wave. The caption tried to make me small. My posture refused. I stood by the mantel and spoke to Margaret's photo in a voice that did not tremble. Mags, I am doing this the way we taught Ethan. Calm, clear, no begging, no shouting, just the truth, written down and acted on. The words filled the room and stayed. On the nightstand, I set the canvas bag with the folders, the pen that fits my hand, and a note card with tomorrow's tasks. Meet Margaret at the courthouse for stamps and certified copies. File the beneficiary update. Ask the recorder's office to place a courtesy notice on the deed so any inquiry pings me and my lawyer. None of those steps starts a fight. They prevent theft by daylight. It is hard to steal in a bright room. I slept well, not because the day was simple, but because the work was clear. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. At first light, I signed the emails Margaret sent for digital consent and records requests. Then I dressed in the navy jacket and slipped the bag over my shoulder. I stood a moment in the doorway, looking back. The living room looked like it always does when I leave for a serious errand. Ready? I locked the door and listened to the click. The courthouse clerk stamped our filings with a thump that felt like punctuation. We requested certified copies and a note on the deed that any inquiry would trigger an alert to me and to her office. He said it was smart. I said teachers like predictability. He smiled and slid the copies through the slot. Walking to the parking lot, Margaret asked if I was ready for calls that might come through Ethan, Vanessa, or her father. Do not argue, she said. Say one sentence, repeat it if you must, then hang up. I asked her what sentence she had in mind. Respect comes first, she said. Payments are revoked. Even in my head, it sounded clean. We parted with a plan to speak at 3. I drove home with the certified copies in the passenger seat, glanced at them at every light like they were a glass bird I did not want to crack. Back at the house, I took a photo of each stamped page and saved them to a folder that only I and Margaret can reach. I ate oatmeal at the sink and washed the bowl and dried it, and set it back on the rack because order helps when storms roll in. Then I waited in the kind of silence that is not empty. It is expectant. The phone buzzed. A voicemail from the hotel, another from the planner, a third from a number that called itself Family Interests and asked me to do the right thing so no one looks bad. I forwarded them all. The world can talk. My paper now speaks louder. At 3, Margaret called. Margaret, they are pressing hard, she said. Good, I answered. It means the guardrails are working. She had one more letter for me to sign, instructing the credit union to deny any third-party payment requests and to notify her office of any attempt. I signed and scanned it back. Expect a personal call tonight, she said. You do not need to explain yourself. Your records will do the explaining. They think I lost, I told her. They are about to learn their mistake. She said she would keep her phone on. I thanked her for standing between me and the noise. Late light stretched across the floorboards like long gold fingers. I walked to the mantel, laid my fingertips on the frame of our wedding photo, and felt something old and strong settle where the ache had been. I ended the day by writing one last line on a new page and sliding it under the stamped copies like a small private drumbeat. They do not know I am holding what will change everything. I turned out the lamp. The house breathed with me, steady and sure, waiting for the moment when paper would meet its pride and hold its ground. Morning slid into my house like a careful guest. I brewed coffee, laid out the certified copies Margaret and I collected, and opened the curtains so the maple could lean its green against the window. The buttercream walls caught the light. The hardwood I laid years ago held steady under my shoes. It felt like the house had squared its shoulders with me. By 9, the phone began to ring. The hotel, the planner, a number I did not recognize. I let each call roll to voicemail and forwarded the messages to Margaret. Paper first, conversation later. At 10, the doorbell sounded. I knew the weight of that press. My son holds the button too long. The chime overstays its welcome. I took a breath, set the pen down, and opened the door. Ethan stood on the porch in a suit that still smelled like the ballroom. His tie was loose. His eyes were hot. He did not look like the boy who balanced a wooden plane in 2 hands. He looked like a man who wanted an apology he had not earned. He stepped inside without waiting. The old boards announced him. The house still knew how to tell the truth. "You ruined my wedding," he said. Not a greeting, not a question. "You humiliated us. You humiliated Vanessa. You've always wanted control, and you finally got it." I let the words sit. "No," I said, and my voice surprised me with how even it was. "You ruined it when you stood silent. You ruined it when you watched your wife point at me and tell me to leave." I gestured toward the mantel. "I paid for the school that taught you to speak. I paid for the car that carried you to work. I helped pay for that party. But I will not pay for my own erasure." He moved his jaw the way a man does when he knows a truth has landed. Then he tried a different path. "Fine," he said. "If you love me, prove it. Move the life insurance to Vanessa. Make her the beneficiary. Show us you're not trying to control us from beyond the grave." I stared at him. The request was so naked it took the air for a moment. He stood under his mother's photo and asked me to put a price tag on love and hand it to a stranger. Anger rose, but behind it came something quieter and stronger. Clarity. "No," I said. "Not because I do not love you, because love is not a lever you pull to move a man's house and money where you want them. That policy exists to close a circle you did not draw. It honors what your mother and I built. It will not be used to reward cruelty." He laughed through his nose, a sound I had never heard from him. "So that's it. You decide everything. You punish me." He softened his tone. "Dad, we're family. Don't make this ugly. Sign the change. It proves you trust us." "Trust is not proved by surrender," I said. "It is proved by respect. You had an opportunity to show it. You did not take it." He looked at the mantel, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a crisp form. "Vanessa's dad drafted this beneficiary change," he said. "All you have to do is sign. It's cleaner than dragging this out." I did not touch the paper. "Put it away," I told him. "This is the last time you bring that into my house." Something snapped behind his eyes. He shoved the form back into his pocket and spat, "You're making a mistake. People will know what you did." "Let them know," I answered. "I will too." He left the same way he arrived, without waiting. The door closed with a hard seal, and the house exhaled. I stood in the quiet and felt my heart settle into a different rhythm. Not hot, not frantic, firm. At the sink, I let cold water run over my wrists until the pulse in my neck stopped pounding. I dried my hands on the striped towel Margaret picked years ago and turned back to the table. The folder waited. So did the day. I texted Margaret 3 lines. Ethan demanded a beneficiary change. Mark drafted the form. I refused. Her reply landed before the screen dimmed. "Understood. Do not engage. I'm filing an advisory with the court and a fraud notice with your bank." 10 minutes later, she called. Her voice carried the steady charge she gets when a case shifts from smoke to flame. "I pulled the planner's internal notes, the hotel's billing queue, and your last 2 credit card cycles," she said. "Robert, there's a charge posted 3 weeks ago. Maldives Resort and Spa, $27,000. Primary contact, Vanessa Hayes." The room hummed in my ears. I asked her to say it again. She did, clean and careful, like a nurse repeating a dosage. I set my hand on the back of the chair and let the blow pass through. When the wave was gone, words returned. "File the fraud report," I said. Freeze whatever needs freezing. I never authorized that charge. I've already called the bank, she said. They marked it disputed and issued a provisional hold. I'm drafting an affidavit for you to sign. We'll attach the resort confirmation, the hotel correspondence, and the screenshot of that post that mocked you. I'll also request an emergency hearing for injunctive relief. We need the court to draw a bright line. The phrase sounded formal, but I knew what she meant. A judge would look at the facts and decide whether to put a legal fence around my house, my accounts, and my name. How soon? I asked. I'm pushing for tomorrow morning, she said. Multnomah County, Room 4B. Bring your deed, bank statements, and the limited power of attorney you signed yesterday. Wear the navy jacket. It reads well. I almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because the image of a jacket that reads well felt exactly right. In court, even cloth has to speak. I'll be there, I said. After we hung up, I walked to the mantel and looked at Margaret's picture. Her smile, the one from Cannon Beach with the wind in her hair, steadied me. They used my card for a honeymoon, I told the glass. They used my silence as permission. That ends today. I spent the next hour building a simple stack. Certified copy of the deed. Last tax bill. Savings statements showing $280,000. The credit union's alert confirmations. The limited power of attorney. Printouts of the Ballroom Post with the caption that turned me into a joke. The credit card summary with the Maldives charge highlighted in yellow. I wrote a one-page statement of facts in plain sentences. No heat. Just dates, amounts, names. The clerk from the courthouse called at 2:30. We had a slot the next morning for a temporary restraining order on assets and instruments. 9 a.m., Room 4B. I wrote it on an index card and tucked it under the magnet shaped like a lighthouse. Then I stepped into the backyard and stood under the maple. The air smelled like wet leaves and iron. I did not pray for victory. I prayed for clarity, for language that would not trip when I needed it. Inside, I checked my phone. A text from Ethan buzzed into view, just a fragment. Dad, call me. We can fix this if you stop now. I put the phone face down on the table and let the sentence sit there alone. Fix this. The words meant different things to different people. For me, fixing it meant telling the truth with documents. For him, fixing it meant I would pretend I had not read what I had read. Evening crept through the kitchen window. I laid out the clothes Margaret told me to wear and set the folder by the door. Before bed, I stood again at the mantel. We're not asking for revenge, I said toward the photo. We're asking for honest math. The house held that sentence the way old houses hold heat. When I turned off the light, the room did not feel dark. It felt decided. Dawn was quiet in the way good paper is quiet. I woke before the alarm, shaved, and tied the same simple tie I wore to Ethan's high school graduation. On the kitchen table, the folder looked heavier than its weight. I checked each page one more time, then slid everything into a neat sleeve. I thought of the first night in this house after we closed, when I walked to the attic and put my hand on the main beam and said out loud, "This will hold." I wanted that sentence in the courtroom. I parked 2 blocks from the courthouse and walked through a city just waking up, windows lighting one by one. Margaret met me at the entrance, brisk and calm. She carried a leather portfolio and a paper cup of tea. "Breathe," she said. "We present the facts. Let the law do the rest." We cleared security, climbed the stairs, and found Room 4B. The benches were polished by years of other people's stories. The seal above the bench watched with a steady gold eye. Ethan and Vanessa arrived with Mark 10 minutes later. She wore a fitted dress and a face arranged for sympathy. Mark moved his jaw like a man chewing a secret. Ethan would not look at me. We sat on opposite sides, the way strangers sit when there is nothing left to pretend. I pressed my thumb to the edge of the folder until I could feel the proof of the paper cut from last night. It hurt just enough to keep me present. The clerk called our case. I stood because standing felt like respect, not only for the judge, but for the life that had brought me to that bench. Margaret rose and set our petition on the table between us and the court, like a carpenter laying a level on a crooked board. The plan from yesterday had become the room we were standing in. Now we would learn whether it had a door. Margaret spoke first. She gave the judge my name, age, address, the house value on the last tax bill, and the savings balance. She said I paid for my son's education, helped fund the wedding, and left after his wife told me to go. She said I revoked unsettled payments, and that the next morning we found a $27,000 Maldives charge on my card with Vanessa listed as primary contact. She asked for a temporary restraining order to protect my assets and instruments. The judge read in silence, then asked whether there was a police report and whether the bank had acknowledged the fraud claim. Margaret answered yes and pointed to the blue tabs. The judge turned to the other table. "Respondents," she said. "Do you wish to be heard?" Mark stood. He used words like misunderstanding and family gift. He said the resort had been reserved as part of a plan we all knew about. He called the ballroom scene an emotional moment. Vanessa added that she had planned a surprise, believed the card on file belonged to a general fund, and blamed a cousin for the cruel caption. Ethan kept his eyes down. The judge raised a hand. "This is a courtroom, not a ballroom," she said. "The question is whether the petitioner faces financial harm and whether there is evidence of exploitation." Her voice never rose. It did not need to. "Counsel, call your witness." I swore and sat. The microphone picked up the dry click in my throat, so I drank a sip of water and began. I told the court I had paid $60,000 for tuition, $25,000 for his car, and opened a line of credit to help underwrite the wedding. I said I was told to leave while my son stood silent. I said the next morning Margaret found a Maldives charge with Vanessa as contact. Then I said the sentence I had practiced on the walk-in: "I will not fund my own erasure." Margaret asked 3 questions. Did I ever give Vanessa my card? No, not to keep. Did I discuss travel plans? No. Was I asked to change my life insurance beneficiary? Yes, yesterday my son brought a form drafted by his father-in-law and asked me to sign it. I refused. Why? Because love is not a lever to move a man's house and money where you want them, and I will not sign a paper that rewards cruelty. The judge turned to the other table. "Cross?" she asked. Mark tried to soften the Maldives charge by asking whether I had ever paid for wedding items directly. I told the truth. I had paid for a cake tasting in person with my card in my hand. He asked if I had promised a large gift. I said I had promised to be kind and to help, not to surrender my accounts. He sat. Vanessa stood and kept her eyes on the table. She said she believed the card was a standing gift because I had been generous. Margaret asked who filled in the resort's contact email. "I did," she answered, so quietly the microphone almost missed it. Margaret asked who typed the caption on the post. Vanessa said a friend. Margaret slid a printout across the table and asked why it used a nickname only Vanessa used for me. Vanessa had no answer. Ethan finally spoke. He did not ask me questions. He told the judge I always needed to win, that my generosity came with strings, that I had humiliated him by canceling payments and dragging his new family into court. The judge listened and then asked him 3 plain questions. Had I ever denied him shelter or food? No. Had I ever forced him to sign a document? No. Had he encouraged his wife to apologize after the ceremony? He looked at the floor and said no. The judge nodded and looked back at Margaret. Margaret made our request in the cadence of an order. Freeze any unsettled wedding payments. Prohibit the respondents from using or attempting to use my financial instruments. Enjoin attempts to change beneficiaries, account holders, or deed status without my notarized consent. Require immediate cancellation of the resort booking and a hold of disputed funds. No direct contact with me about finances, all communication through counsel. The judge sat very still. The room held its breath. Then she read her ruling. Temporary restraining order granted. All unsettled wedding payments frozen. No use of my financial instruments by respondents. No attempts to change beneficiaries or title. Immediate notice to the resort and bank. Any violation will be contempt. Her voice was steady and final, each point a nail set into wood. Reaction came like the weather. Vanessa's face collapsed into tears she could not use. Mark swore under his breath and stared at the floor as if numbers might rise like steam and save him. Ethan went pale and still, a man dressed for a toast, facing a mirror he did not like. The clerk stamped the order. Margaret wrote the case number on the top copy and slid it toward me. The sound of the stamp echoed in the paneled room and somewhere in my chest. The judge added one last instruction. "Mr. Miller," she said, "if anyone contacts you directly about your finances, say the matter is before the court and end the call. Do not argue. Let the papers speak." I told her I understood. She nodded and moved on to the next case as if she had not just steadied a world. In the hall, Margaret tapped the highlighted lines. "This is your shield," she said. "Carry it. If a wave comes, hold it up." We rode the elevator down with a bailiff who said nothing and an older couple who gave me the kind of small smile strangers share when they have watched a right thing happen. Outside, the air felt different, like a storm had moved on. On the steps, my phone buzzed. I let the calls fall to voicemail. Vanessa said I was cruel, that I had taken food from her mouth, that I would be sorry when people chose sides. Mark used businessman words about reputation and optics and proposed a private fix if I would be reasonable. I forwarded both messages to Margaret and deleted them. Silence can be a tool when it rests on a foundation of paper. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment too below to let me know you're here with me. We stepped into the hallway. Margaret pressed the order into a clear sleeve and handed it to me like a passport. "We send notice to the resort, the credit union, the planner, and the hotel before close of business," she said. "I'll file the affidavit on the Maldives charge and forward the voicemail transcripts. You go home. Answer only me. If anyone else calls, let the machine eat it." On the steps, we did not linger. We crossed to a corner coffee shop and steadied a wobbly table with a folded napkin. She drank tea. I sipped coffee and watched steam curl like a small flag of truce. We made a short list. Email the order to the bank manager with the blue badge. Scan and send to the resort's billing department. Drop a copy at the planner's office for her file. Margaret tapped the page each time I repeated the case number out loud. Saying it made the order feel real. By 5, the notices were out. The resort replied with a one-line confirmation. "Booking canceled, funds on hold, pending dispute." The credit union flagged my profile with a hard stop. The planner wrote back, "Thank you for the clarity." I stood at my kitchen window while the sun slid behind the maples. Calm came not as a shout, but as a steadying weight in the chest. I set the order in the firebox beside the deed and locked it, then touched the key in my pocket and breathed, steady and sure. The game has changed. Now it is time to finish. The house felt different after the order was signed. It no longer carried the weight of constant suspicion. For the first time in weeks, maybe even months, I could sit at my own table without the sense that hands were reaching into my pockets from another room. The judge's words still echoed in my ears like a steady drumbeat. Temporary restraining order granted, assets protected, no further attempts to change beneficiaries or title. That ruling had stripped Ethan and Vanessa of their weapons. They had walked into the courtroom armed with arrogance and walked out with nothing but excuses clutched in their fists. And me? I walked out with my dignity, intact, my assets safe, and the law standing between me and their greed. But a ruling is not the end of a story. A ruling is a fence, and fences only work if you decide what to keep inside and what to keep out. I spent that first night after court pacing my living room, touching the edges of furniture Margaret had chosen, running my hand along the wood I had sanded, remembering the paint we had rolled on together. The house was still beautiful, still solid, but it had been poisoned by betrayal. Every corner whispered the echo of Ethan's silence. Every doorway seemed to carry Vanessa's smirk. I knew that even with the deed locked safely in my firebox, this house was no longer the sanctuary it had once been. It had become a battlefield, and I didn't want to live on a battlefield anymore. So I called Margaret Chen and told her I wanted to sell. $600,000 was the appraised value, and the market in Portland was holding steady. She asked if I was sure, reminded me that the order had secured it, and that I could live here safely for years. I told her safety wasn't enough. "I don't want to sit inside these walls and remember humiliation," I said. "I want to build something new before time takes the chance away." She was silent for a moment, then told me she respected the decision. "Then let's do it right," she said, and I could hear the click of her pen on the other end of the line. Within a week, the house was listed, and the first offers started to come. It surprised me how quickly people wanted it. Young couples walked through, talking about where they would put a crib, what colors they would paint the bedrooms. For a moment, I wanted to warn them that these walls carried ghosts of betrayal. But I realized ghosts only linger if you keep feeding them. These buyers had their own stories to write. I accepted an offer close to the asking price. $600,000 transferred into my account, and for the first time in years, I felt the heavy weight of ownership lift off my shoulders like a coat I didn't need anymore. Of that money, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with $100,000. I set up the Margaret Miller Scholarship Fund at Oregon State University, where Ethan had once walked the campus halls with his tuition paid by me and his mother. The fund would help students who had lost a parent to illness, just as Margaret had gone too soon. Signing those papers was the first time in months I cried without bitterness. The check I handed over felt like a prayer turned into paper. Margaret's name would live on not as a battlefield casualty in a family war, but as a beacon for kids who needed a chance. "This is for you," I whispered at the ceremony, and for the first time, the whisper carried peace instead of anger. With $400,000 still steady in my accounts, I went looking for a new place. I didn't need a big house anymore. I needed something manageable, somewhere that felt like it was mine from the ground up. I found a small brick apartment building near Laurelhurst Park. 2 bedrooms, a balcony that looked out over the green where families walked their dogs and seniors practiced Tai Chi in the mornings. $200,000 bought me the deed to a corner unit. It wasn't grand. It wasn't the house where Margaret had planted roses or where Ethan had blown out birthday candles. But it was clean, quiet, and entirely free of the poison that had soaked my old walls. I signed the papers, handed over the cashier's check, and slipped the new keys into my pocket with a sense of finality that shook me to my core. For the first time since the betrayal began, I felt light. Moving day was not easy. I packed boxes of books, photo albums, and tools into the back of the pickup. Each step down the front porch felt like peeling a layer of skin. I left behind furniture that carried too many memories and took only the essentials. When I closed the door of the old house for the last time, I pressed my palm against the frame and whispered, "You did your job. Thank you, but I don't belong here anymore." Then I walked away without looking back. The apartment was smaller, simpler. The first night I slept there, the silence was different. Not the heavy silence of a house wounded by betrayal, but the gentle quiet of a place waiting to be filled with life. I planted geraniums in a wooden box on the balcony and watched the colors brighten against the brick. I found myself cooking more, eating at a small round table near the window where the light poured in like forgiveness. In the evenings, I walked the park paths, greeting neighbors who didn't know my story and didn't need to. To them, I was just another man with steady steps and time to spare. For the first time in years, I was just Robert again, not Robert the father betrayed. The news about Ethan and Vanessa spread faster than I expected. Portland is not a small town, but people talk. Word of the court order leaked, and whispers about financial fraud, reached workplaces and neighbors. Mark's business contacts distanced themselves. Vanessa's friends unfollowed her in clusters. The Maldives charge became a punchline in certain circles, and the photo of me being humiliated at the wedding lost its cruel edge when people learned the context. What had been a mockery turned into a symbol of my resilience. Meanwhile, Ethan's silence on that night came back to haunt him louder than any words he could have spoken. Without my support, the Hayes family floundered. Bills piled up, creditors knocked. They sold their SUV and downsized to a rental apartment on the edge of town. The proud house they once flaunted was gone, replaced by a beige unit with peeling paint. I didn't revel in their downfall, but I couldn't ignore the symmetry. They had tried to strip me of dignity and stability, and in the end, it was theirs that crumbled. Ethan called once. The number lit up my phone late on a Sunday evening. Against my better judgment, I answered. His voice was thinner than I remembered. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry. We lost everything. Vanessa, she's struggling. I should have stopped it before it went this far. Please, can we talk?" For a moment, I heard the boy he had been, the boy who had once cried in my arms when his bike tipped on gravel. But the memory of his silence, the image of him standing in that ballroom while I was shamed, was stronger. I let the pause stretch long enough for him to feel it. Then I said, "I wish you well, Ethan, but my life isn't in your hands anymore." I hung up, and for the first time I felt no guilt, just release. I began to find joy in the small things, cooking for one without feeling lonely, watching cardinals land on the park fence, reading Margaret's old cookbooks, and trying recipes she had marked with stars. I joined a community garden group, trading stories with retirees who didn't care who my son had married or how much money I once had. One afternoon, kneeling in the dirt with soil under my nails, I realized I was smiling without trying. It struck me then. Freedom is not the absence of responsibility. It is the absence of manipulation. The lessons came clear with time. For parents, I realized love does not mean handing over the keys to your dignity. It means giving enough to build a foundation, but not so much that your children believe they own the house of your soul. For children, the lesson was sharper. Gratitude is not measured in dollars, and inheritance is not a birthright. Respect is the only true currency between generations. And for people in this modern world, where betrayal often hides behind contracts and posts on glowing screens, the truth is that dignity and boundaries are worth more than any figure in a savings account. Sometimes, late at night, I whisper to Margaret's photo on the small shelf in my new apartment. "I'm finally free," I say. "I carried our work as far as I could. Now, I live with peace in my chest." And in those moments, I know she would have approved of every choice, not because I fought our son, but because I defended the values we raised him to know, even if he abandoned them. As weeks turned into months, my life grew lighter. I walked the park paths every morning, planted more flowers, and even joined a local charity that built ramps for seniors in wheelchairs. Hammering nails alongside strangers who quickly became friends, I felt a part of something larger than my own scars. I wasn't rebuilding just my dignity. I was building community brick by brick, smile by smile. And with every nail driven, the weight of betrayal sank further into the past where it belonged. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. One evening, watching the sun sink over the park, I thought about Ethan and Vanessa. Maybe one day they would learn that greed rots the very ground it grows on. Maybe one day they would teach their own children the opposite of what they had practiced. But that was their journey, not mine. Mine was simple now. Mine was peace. Mine was freedom. Mine was self-respect. I ended that day with a quiet vow. I don't need them anymore, I told myself. I have myself, and that's enough. And for the first time, the words didn't feel like a consolation. They felt like a victory. What I didn't know yet was that this peace would lead me to new doors. At the charity, someone mentioned a larger project, a community program for seniors who had been financially exploited. They asked if I might be willing to speak, to share what I had endured. I hesitated at first, but as I looked at their faces, eager for hope, I realized maybe my scars could light someone else's way. That possibility stirred something inside me, something that would become the next chapter of this story. The first weeks in my new apartment felt like learning how to breathe again. The rooms were smaller than the old house, but every inch of them belonged to me, and no shadow of betrayal lingered in the corners. The balcony looked out over Laurelhurst Park, where the sound of children laughing mixed with the rustle of trees. At night, I sat near the window with a cup of tea, watching the lamps flicker on along the park paths, and I felt something I hadn't in years, peace that didn't come with conditions. The sale of the house had closed, the scholarship fund bore Margaret's name, and the last of the moving boxes had been unpacked. My life, for the first time in decades, was my own again. News about Ethan and Vanessa reached me in fragments, usually through neighbors or acquaintances who thought I should know. They had moved into a rental apartment on the outskirts of Portland, far from the ballroom halls where they once strutted. The rent was cheap, the walls thin, and the bills kept piling up. Vanessa lost her job after the scandal of the Maldives charge became common gossip. Ethan bounced between temporary work, his pride dented beyond repair. They had thought they would inherit stability and status by taking mine, but what they ended up with was the weight of debt and a reputation tainted by greed. People in this city remember, and once trust is broken, it rarely returns. I didn't gloat, but the contrast was clear. While their world shrank, mine was finally expanding in ways that had nothing to do with square footage or dollar signs. I filled my days with small joys. I joined a community garden 2 blocks from my apartment. The first time I dug my hands into the soil there, I remembered Margaret's roses, how she used to hum as she pressed roots into the ground. Now I planted tomatoes and marigolds shoulder to shoulder with retirees who didn't care about my last name or the lawsuits I'd survived. They cared only that I showed up with a spade, ready to help. On Thursdays, I attended a beginner's painting class at the community center. My hands were clumsy with the brush, but the colors bled across the canvas in ways that made me smile. I even started volunteering with a local charity that built ramps for seniors in wheelchairs. Swinging a hammer beside strangers who soon became friends reminded me that my worth had never been measured by what sat in a bank account. It lived in what I could give. Every corner of my apartment began to carry signs of this new life. On the desk sat the paperwork from the scholarship fund, proof that Margaret's name would lift students long after both Ethan and I were gone. On the shelf above, framed photos of her smile reminded me that love was not erased by betrayal. It endured in the choices I made to honor it. And on the balcony, the flower boxes bloomed brighter each week, symbols that even when roots were cut, new life could grow again. One afternoon, after returning from the garden, I found a letter slipped under my door. The handwriting was shaky, the envelope unmarked. My stomach sank before I even opened it. It was from Ethan. Inside, the words staggered across the page, heavy with apology. He admitted the lies, the manipulation, the silence that night when he should have stood by me. He wrote that Vanessa was gone now, that he was trying to rebuild, and that he hoped I might forgive him. I sat in my chair holding the letter for a long while, reading the sentences over and over. Part of me wanted to believe in second chances, but the larger part of me remembered the courtroom, the photo online, the form he had once asked me to sign to strip away my life's work. Forgiveness is not the same as reopening a wound. I folded the letter carefully, not tearing it, not discarding it. I placed it beneath my father's old pocket watch on the shelf. That watch had ticked through generations, reminding me of time's weight and of the value of integrity. As I set the letter down, I whispered to the still room, "I don't need his apology. I have myself." The words did not come with bitterness this time. They came with clarity, like cool water running through my chest. For years, I had carried the burden of Ethan's choices, but now I carried only my own. Walking through the park the next morning, the lesson came into sharper focus. Parents often give until their backs break, mistaking sacrifice for love. But true love does not mean surrendering your dignity. It means guiding, supporting, and then letting your children walk their own path, even if they stumble into ruin. That was the lesson for me, and for every parent who might one day watch their generosity twisted into entitlement. Children, too, have their lessons. Respect cannot be bought, inheritance is not owed, and silence in the face of cruelty is its own betrayal. And for people living in this hurried modern world, the truth is simple. Possessions fade, reputations crumble, but dignity and boundaries, those are the only treasures worth guarding. Sometimes neighbors ask if I miss the old house. I tell them no. I don't miss walls that held echoes of betrayal. I don't miss floors that groaned under the weight of silence. Here, in this modest apartment overlooking the park, I wake to the sound of laughter. I eat breakfast with sunlight spilling across the table, and I rest at night without fear of who might be plotting behind my back. This is freedom, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that fills your lungs slowly until you realize you are whole again. I cut ties completely with Ethan after that letter. I never responded, never picked up the phone when his number appeared. My boundary was not punishment, it was protection. Protection of the peace I had fought so hard to earn. Protection of the dignity I refused to surrender again. He may one day rebuild his life, or he may not. That is no longer mine to carry. My life is here, among people who respect me, in a community that values honesty, in a home filled with light and small joys. The days flow with ease now. Morning walks through the park, afternoons in the garden, evenings at the easel. Each moment confirms the choice I made to leave the battlefield behind. Every day is proof that I chose well. Sometimes, standing on my balcony as the sun dips low, I whisper to Margaret, "I found where I belong." And the breeze through the flowers feels like her answer. In the end, the lesson is clear. Family is not defined by blood alone. Family is defined by respect, by love that does not demand surrender, by presence in moments of trial. I learned that the hard way, but I learned it well. And I know now, beyond any doubt, that character is the only inheritance worth leaving. Money fades, houses crumble, but the dignity you guard for yourself, that is the legacy that endures. And so, as I close this chapter of my life, I do it with peace in my chest and clarity in my heart. I do it with the knowledge that I no longer live under the shadow of betrayal, but in the sunlight of self-respect. And that is enough, more than enough. It is everything. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.